Okay, some very, very important information. I want you to meet Atlas and Plato. Plato is on your right, Atlas is on your left, and their names fit them. Plato is very quietly sneaky. He's like a thinker, and Atlas is noisy and nervous and goes along in Plato's shadow a bit. Now, the reason I'm introducing them to you is because it's one of the consequences of working from home is you may hear my dogs barking. So I will do the best that I can, and I have them entertained as best as I can. They are on the patio, and hopefully they will just enjoy watching the outside people walking by. But if they should see something, another dog, you may hear some noise in the back. So I
love that.
I appreciate your understanding.
Karen, I'm going to interject 1 second. Sorry. The other thing that I'm going to ask everyone who is participating in the program today, if you will be sure to mute yourself. That way, if Karen is talking and there's some background noise on your end, she won't be interrupted. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, so in general, what is it we're talking about? What is RDBT, and is it the same as DBT? Well, first of all, it's definitely not the same as DBT. It's almost the opposite of DBT, although they have some common characteristics. So RDBT is a transdiagnostic treatment, and it is oriented to treat what's called maladaptive overcontrolled coping. Transdiagnostic means that it goes across diagnoses. And so instead of having a treatment for a specific diagnosis, for example, if you have dependent personality disorder and you had a treatment just for that disorder, then that would not be transdiagnostic. Transdiagnostic goes across diagnostic categories to try to treat underlying problems that each diagnosis can stem from. And we're going to learn more about that. Transdiagnostic seems to be the way of the future because our diagnostic categories, which we'll also talk about more later, aren't that distinct from each other. RDBT is actually new in terms of the book was released, I think, 2 years ago, but it's been in research for over 20 years and 20 years of translational treatment research. Translational research means that it has pulled from many different areas. It's pulled from medical sciences, it's pulled from evolutionary science, it's pulled from developmental science. So it has research from many different areas, not just from psychology. The treatment developer is Thomas Lynch, and he has done over 350 patients have been involved in the research trials, and that is throughout the world, and plus thousands clinically. So it has a solid base. For comparison's sake, Marcia had 23 clients when she first published DBT. It's informed by dialectical philosophy, it's informed by behavior therapy, and mindfulness-based approaches. So why do we need a new treatment? We have so many different types of therapy right now, and in the psychology world, they are becoming more and more questioning about if you're bringing a new therapy on board, why? What need is it going to serve? Well, in psychology, I think that your experience may be similar to mine. We'll see. We're at a crossroads. One of the most difficult things for me is when people come into the office and we don't know how to help them. There's a significant proportion of people that are failing to benefit from treatment now. And it can be due to chronicity, chronic problems, chronic depression, chronic anxiety. It can be due to comorbidity because there's different diagnoses. The client has 3, 4, 5, 6. I've seen even more diagnoses that one client might have. And it's, so what do you treat? Or pre-existing personality disorder problems. And until recently, we really weren't addressing personality disorder issues in our treatment. Our treatments were more oriented toward axis 1. So it was something we really didn't know how to do. DBT was one of the first.
What? No, right.
It was one of the first to actually address underlying personality disorders, and it addressed borderline personality disorder. But there are many other personality disorders that weren't being addressed. In fact, 1 out of every 10 people in the community have a personality disorder. I was shocked by that. That is a large number of people. And you may be surprised by this, but BPD is not the most common. BPD is loud. BPD is in your face. People with BPD are dramatic and they're getting themselves in trouble and they're mad at you and they're yelling and they're cutting. They're very vocal and expressive. And overcontrolled people that have overcontrolled personality disorders are quiet, reserved. You don't know the pain that they're in. And so we don't recognize how prominent the overcontrolled personality disorders really are. And because we've not been trained, none of us really have been trained to recognize overcontrolled, we don't notice it. We don't know what to look for when we see it. Existing treatments are often not effective for people who have overcontrolled personality disorders and for people who have chronic mental illness. Treatment-resistant depression is called treatment-resistant depression for a reason. It's very difficult to treat. Anorexia nervosa, very difficult to treat. And that's painful for the client and it's painful for us. Most evidence-based therapies that are coming out, evidence-based meaning that they have had a random controlled research trial. Most evidence-based therapies have been tested on non-chronic and non-comorbid populations. They want to get as pure, a client with as pure disorder as possible so that they are testing exactly what they say they're going to treat. The problem is that's not who you and I see. We see individuals that have a multiple diagnoses. We see individuals that are chronic. We rarely see a client that just has a phobia, for example. I can't tell you the last time I saw someone who had just a simple phobia. So the evidence-based therapies that are being tested aren't really being tested on the population that we see. And that's not helpful to us. So RDBT was developed in part to address these issues, to address the comorbidity, to address pre-existing personality problems, to have the research be on people in the community that clinicians see in their practice, and to be able to show the effectiveness on chronic disorders. And for me, that was pretty exciting. So we can look at the comorbidity rate. What does the research say about comorbidity? Well, 45% of the people with depression also have a personality disorder. 51% of the people that have depression also have anxiety. 65% of the people that have an eating disorder also have anxiety. And 52% of the people with an eating disorder also have a personality disorder. That is so high. And in terms of the incidence of overcontrolled personality disorders, what we know is that overcontrolled disorders actually are about 73% of the total of overcontrolled of the personality disorders. So you have a division of people who are depressed, who are mid to older adults who are depressed, and you can sort of see the division of personality disorders that make up that group. And obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which is an overcontrolled personality disorder, is 39% of that. Dependent is overcontrolled. Narcissistic, we're not sure, it sort of tends to be. Paranoid is overcontrolled, and schizotypal is overcontrolled. So that all adds up to a significant number of the people who have chronic depression having an overcontrolled personality disorder. So what Tom Lynch did, Tom developed RDBT. And so he was working with Marsha for a while, Marsha Linehan, who developed dialectical behavior therapy. And so what he did was he said, well, what do we need to consider? What is it that allows healthy people to be healthy? What are those characteristics? What is it that's allowed us to survive? And what's allowed human beings to survive, like in the age of dinosaurs? You know, when we had these predators and they were so much bigger than we were, and we didn't have the scales on our skin. We didn't have sharp claws. We weren't particularly fast. And one of the things he looked at, and not just him, but other people too, is that part of the way that we survive, part of that makes us so resilient, is that we found a way to bind together. We found a way to be a tribe. And we overcame sort of selfish tendencies just to think about ourselves and to think about people that weren't even members of our family and to connect. The picture is from Houston, actually, which was such a recent example of this. We still need each other. We still need a tribe. And the Harvey, this was from Harvey, I think. And when we saw people pull together, when we also saw them not, but in general, as a tribe, we survive and we're better together. And that's part of what helps us be emotionally healthy, that ability to connect with other people.
Karen, it's Maddie. We had a question.
Okay.
A few people asked, and you may be getting to this, but how would you define over-controlled personality disorders?
Yes, we're coming to that.
Okay.
Yeah, if I don't get it by the end, remind me, but if I don't, there's something wrong with me. Okay, so this importance of connection. So part of, just to throw a little bit out about over-controlled personality disorder, is that part of the issue for people who are over-controlled is to develop a true connection. And that's kind of why we're talking about the importance of tribe right now. That people who are over-controlled, one of the issues is that they have a really hard time connecting in an intimate way with other people. And that's so important because in our genes almost, it is scary and threatening to not be able to be part of a tribe. And that's because with our early ancestors in our development as human beings, if you were socially isolated, you could die. If you weren't part of the caveman tribe, you could die. And so when the tribe started working on shared values and goals, we had a sense of connection. And when we had a sense of connection, we felt safer. When we feel part of a tribe, we do feel safe. And many years ago, over 10 years ago, I had such a personal experience with this. I was diagnosed with cancer. And all of a sudden, all this work that I do, I tend to be a workaholic, and all this work that I do really didn't matter. And the importance of just having someone be there was amazing to me, and how much it lowered my fear and how comforting it was. Didn't change the diagnosis, and I'm fine, by the way, but it didn't change the diagnosis. But one of our ultimate ways of survival is friendship. And then when you look at the research also in terms of mental health, one of the contributions to resiliency is connection with other people. So what's important if people with overcontrol have difficulty connecting? What is it that helps us connect with people? What is it that's really important about being able to develop that connection? Why can't we just say, go make friends? Well, so we look at how this connection developed. And one of the ways that we're able to connect with other people is through self-control. And that's the ability to inhibit our emotional urges, to inhibit our impulses, and to control our behaviors. So that we're not like stealing food from each other, we're not eating all the food, not eating all the leftover pizza from the refrigerator. We're able to store and plan for the future and not just gobble up whatever we have, spend all our money now and not plan for the future. We can contribute to each other, share our food, share our resources. And the self-control also enables us not just to act, not just to go and defend ourselves and punch people in the nose when we're mad. We were able to regulate how we signal our intentions. And we signaled our intentions to people that, stay away or come close. And those signals became an important part of friendship. You didn't just have to act, you could signal it and people could understand. They could see you from a distance and say, that person has friendly intentions, or not so sure. And that became part of our ability to connect with each other. So what happened for us in psychology, as therapists, as in research, is that we began to see self-control as highly desirable. And that, the problem for borderline personality disorder was that they didn't have self-control. And that we want to teach them regulation of their emotions, control of their impulses, and that sort of thing. So self-control was looked at as being part of psychological well-being. Here's under control with limited with limited well-being and limited self-control. And the more control you had, the more optimal it was seen. So part of what we do in therapy is teach people self-control. But what if self-control is not really like that? What if you can have too much of a good thing? So what if it's more of a bell curve? And overcontrolled would be the top, the extreme of self-control. Here's optimal control, and then there's under control. Maybe you can have too much of a good thing. In fact, we know for sure you can. Because these people over here in the overcontrolled area, they're not roaming the streets in gangs. They're not causing riots. They're not the people you see yelling. They are hyper-detailed, focused perfectionists. They tend to see mistakes everywhere, including in themselves. They judge themselves very harshly. They tend to work harder than most other people. They're very dedicated, very dutiful. They don't make a big deal out of it, although inside they can have a lot of resentment sometimes. And they are expert at not appearing deviant on the outside. Never, in the overcontrol world, it's never let them see you sweat. So we have not really paid attention to this group of people because they weren't asking for our attention. They weren't signaling for our attention, but yet they were in a lot of misery. So let's take a look. This is the self-control dialectic. What are we talking about? Now, in general, remember, we don't really go by diagnoses. We're trying to look for other characteristics, which I'll share with you later. But in general, this is how the diagnoses would fall. Over here are disorders of overcontrol. Now, this is not obsessive-compulsive disorder. This is obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. Obsessive-compulsive disorder could be either under control or over controlled, interestingly enough. Paranoid personality disorders over here, avoidant, anorexia nervosa. And anorexia nervosa is sort of a classic over control disorder, very high perfectionistic people. Just think of the control it takes to not eat to the point that you're starving. It's also the autism spectrum disorders are here, treatment-resistant anxiety. In general, it's not exactly a one-to-one, but in general, disorders of overcontrol are disorders of internalization, the internalizing disorders, if you're familiar with that term. And under control are the disorders that are externalizing, such as bipolar, conduct disorders, histrionic personality disorder, narcissistic. The jury's still out because there may be different types of narcissistic disorders. And there's sort of a grandiose narcissistic disorder that would go there. We're not so sure about the other types. Antisocial and borderline. Borderline is the one we typically know the most about for undercontrolled. So overcontrol is emotionally constricted. They inhibit their expression of their emotions. They're very risk averse. And over here, we've got this big expression of emotion and impulse. Over here in undercontrolled, their behaviors are very mood dependent. How they feel is what they do. Over here on overcontrolled, they are planful, rule-oriented, and it's definitely not mood dependent. Okay, so Maddie, can you just ask everybody if they're with me, if they can raise their hand or give a signal? Yay, okay. Are people with me?
I think people are with you. We've gotten some questions, but I've asked them. Are you okay with me sharing a copy of the PowerPoint?
Yes, I am. I need to send you I need to look through.
Okay. We will follow up. We'll send a follow-up email to everyone with the PowerPoint after the presentation. So.
So I want to pull back from the beginning. Remember when I said transdiagnostic? Okay, so the key difference between RDBT and other treatments is that we're not looking at the diagnosis as the problem. We are looking at what underlies the diagnosis as an overcontrolled temperament. But it's a maladaptive coping that comes from an overcontrolled temperament. Now, you and I have a temperament. I happen to have an overcontrolled temperament, which means I get anxious about mistakes and I want to do things as perfectly as I can. I want to know that you guys are following me. I tend to be overcontrolled. It's not pathological. No matter how overcontrolled you are, that's just your temperament. If you're undercontrolled, that's not pathological. So what we're looking at for our work as therapists is pathological coping that's based on overcontrolled, or pathological coping that's based on undercontrol. And then you know what you're treating. Because guys, do we really want to treat? Do we really want to help someone who has an overcontrolled maladaptive coping to learn more self-control? That doesn't make any sense. We want someone who's under control to learn more self-control, but not someone who's over-controlled. We want them to let go a little bit, be more relaxed, chill out, have a cup of coffee. So we know that the over-controlled temperament came before the disorder that developed. And it can develop into anorexia, it can develop into depression, it can develop into obsessive compulsive personality disorder. But if you treat the maladaptive over-controlled coping, then you're treating the underlying cause of the disorder. Or that's the view of radically open DBT. So over-controlled temperament, if you guys know temperament is biological. It is that you are born a certain way. And we're going to talk more about that. Maladaptive OC coping comes from both temperament and the environment. You know, that's the way that your family interacts with you. You hear my dogs? Oh no. So the pathology and the symptom development comes from maladaptive. Hang on just a second.
They're just saying hi.
Oh boy. I think somebody walked by and they just got very upset. Okay, so here we go. Overcontrol biology, that's the biological part. And the environment, what they learn from the family. The families tend to be kind of perfectionistic in general. They tend to be perfectionistic. Mistakes aren't okay. Achievement's really important. Don't seek the limelight. Be dutiful. And that can lead to the symptom development. So when it comes to treatment, one size does not fit all. We cannot treat people who have developed a disorder based on underlying OC temperament with the same treatment that we would treat someone who has an underlying UC temperament. And that's where RDBT comes in. So then, okay, so what are we going to do? How are we going to treat someone with overcontrol? Well, they started by looking at what's healthy about people. What is it we want people to have in order to be able to cope well with today's life? So just take a minute, think for yourself, someone that you really think of as being psychologically healthy. It's okay if it's you. I won't tell. And think about what the characteristics are of that person. What really represents health for you? Well, let's see how close it comes to what RDBT looks at. So the first one is receptivity and openness. And by the way, if you read the research, this is fairly similar across the research that's been done on psychological health, these characteristics that RDBT has pulled out. And the first one is receptivity and openness to new experience and disconfirming feedback in order to learn. What does that mean? So if you have a rigid way of thinking, then you're not really open to new information. If you believe the world is flat, you believe the world is flat, and you're not going to listen to anything any different. If you believe that you are good at singing and people give you all this feedback that you're not, You know, you go to karaoke and you don't get any feedback that you're good, but you're not going to listen to that because you're closed. You're not receptive. And the problem with this is that in relationships, when you are trying to connect with other people, if you're not open to feedback about the way you interact with them and what works to be connected and what doesn't work, you're not going to learn and change. So it really inhibits your ability to develop the skills of relating to other people when you just shut down feedback and you stay closed to new experiences. The second one is flexible control. And flexible controls, and you know, we're using a lot of that these days. It's to adapt to changing environmental conditions. You know, if you are used to driving here in America and you go to England, you have to adapt to driving on a different side of the road. If you are used to just going out and having dinner in a restaurant every night, right now, you have to adjust to that and you're doing it in a different way. So flexible control to adjust to where you are. And more specifically, I guess for our OC folks, it's the ability to be one way in a work environment and to be another way in a social environment. And the third one is intimacy and connectedness. And this keeps coming up. The psychology world is really recognizing the power of loneliness right now and how loneliness is such an issue for so many people. And there's also the idea that loneliness is now preceding depression and preceding other disorders, not treating loneliness as a side effect of depression, but actually as something that precedes it. It's not a causal relationship yet. The research is still being done, but we know that it can precede instead of just being attached to. We used to treat loneliness as sort of a side effect, and now we need to address it more directly. So in terms of this definition of psychological health, what are the deficits of overcontrol? Now, for those of you who ask, what are the characteristics of overcontrol? This is the most general, the most succinct definition. And that is that they lack receptivity and openness. They avoid novel situations. They may have, like many anorexics, have a schedule that they follow every day. They eat at the same time. They do this at the same time. They do that at the same time. They eat the same foods every day. So they have a rigid routine and they want things to be predictable and planned. And it's a difficulty with going with the flow. They avoid feedback. They will shut you down if you try to give them any feedback about their behavior. They have low flexible responding, compulsive need for structure. They lack emotional expression and awareness. Now here is one of the biggest issues for social connection, and they all are, but this one is because they don't show you what they're feeling on the inside. And you remember when we talked earlier about the importance of being able to signal to people what your intention is, and that it's part of how we were able to form tribes? Well, if I sit here and I am showing you no emotional expression whatsoever, and you have no idea whether I'm enjoying the conversation or not, it causes actually a little bit of a threat response in you, because trust comes from being open about your intentions. Trust comes from being aware of how someone's feeling, even when it's something negative. So if I am feeling a negative emotion, but I express it, you may not like what I'm feeling, but you will trust me more than if I keep my emotions hidden. There are basically two ways that someone with overcontrol masks their emotions. And you'll hear more about this later. But one of them is by this blank, flat face, which has sort of a monotone voice. And I don't move my eyebrows and I don't smile. And I just sort of have this blank, flat face. And this blank, flat face is one of the ways that they just show no emotion at all. And the other one is this sort of overly prosocial, when you just smile, and you smile all the time. And you smile even when you say, hey, my house burned down last night and I didn't get anything out. And oh, by the way, the IRS called and it's just a mess over here. And would you please pass the salt? You probably have met, I mean, those are exaggerations, of course, but both of those are ways of hiding who they truly are and hiding the way that they feel about situations, what's happening, and you can't connect because it's not real. And then that lack of connection means that they have aloof and distance relationships. They can have relationships. They can be around people a lot, but there's no true connection. There's no social connection. There's no intimacy, the part of relationships that really matters. It's not just being around people. And again, one of the most important points for me is, why can't I just teach someone social skills? Why can't I just say, go out here, go join this group? And I can't tell you how many meetup groups I have sent people to try to help them get connected. And they still couldn't connect, and I didn't understand why. And this is why, because they're coming from a biological predisposition that leads to these issues. And you can't talk yourself out of something that's biological. And all that leads to emotional loneliness. Okay, so temperament. You guys probably remember this experiment. It's a very old experiment. And what happened was the experimenter gave these children an instruction. And the experimenter said, hey, here's a marshmallow. And if you can wait and not eat the marshmallow while I go out of the room for a few minutes, then when I return, I'll give you another and you'll have two. And the measure was over impulse control. So let's watch what happens in this experiment that is looking at the biotemperament characteristic of self-control. Let's see, here it goes. Aw. Ooh, it looks so good. Uh-oh. Watch how she copes. So I'm guessing you can sort of see the differences between under-controlled and over-controlled. And the over-control is doing her best to get it out of her sight so she doesn't have to look at it. And the under-control just can't wait. Now, I'm using the terms under-control and over-control, and we can't go back. This was many years ago. We can't go back and really see, but this is one of the characteristics where you can see how temperament really impacts the way we respond to our environment. So biotemperament matters. Okay, now we're going to talk about neurology. What are we talking about here in terms of why is this so important? Why is temperament so important? What is it that the biology is all about? So this is the RDBT model of emotions. Over here is the cue. And this is for everybody. This is for both under control and over control. And then we'll tell you specifically what it is about over control, that how they respond differently. So the cue can be either inside the body or outside. It can be that you see someone you know. It can be that you see someone you don't like. It can be you see a car coming. It could be you hear a noise that you don't understand. The cue can be anything, but there's certain categories of cues. So the first one is safety. Now, safety is super important, guys, because when you're in your safety system, when the cues around you tell you that you're safe, that's the only time that you can truly form relationships. It is the time that you're calm, relaxed, and open, and you are curious, you have a desire to socialize, your breathing is slow and deep. It's like, you know, sitting at the beach, have a cup of coffee, you're social, you're receptive, you're very alert to the cues from other people. You can read facial expressions, you can hear their voice tone, you can sense the connection with them, and you're interested in talking with them. That's when you're in your safety zone. So novel, when you see an animal that is alert and just pops up and then is looking around, that's novel. It's like, what's going on here? So when you hear a loud noise, your nervous system is going into novel. And by the way, safety is parasympathetic, you know, rest and digest for the people that know about that. In the novel, that ventral vagal system that helps us be calm and relaxed is withdrawn. And our sympathetic nervous system, which is our threat response, is not activated yet because we don't know what's going on. We're just focused on figuring it out. And so we have an urge to stand still. But when we're in that, we're not ready. We don't want to socialize. We're trying to figure out, are we safe? Are we in danger? And then there's the reward system. And in the reward system, you're excited, you're elated, you just graduated, you just finished your dissertation, you got a call from someone that you just really love to talk to. That's reward. You feel an urge to pursue, an urge to approach. Your body's animated, your breath is faster, your excited approach, going after. But you can't make friends here that well because you're so excited and focused on what's making you happy, so you don't really notice other people's reactions. You can step on people's toes to get to the singer that you love to hear, that you're so excited to hear. You don't notice how you're annoying other people. So your reward system is kind of a cool place to be, but it's also very focused on the reward. So it's not necessarily about the people around you. Now the threat system. And here the sympathetic nervous system is activated into defensive arousal. Sympathetic nervous system is activated under reward for excitatory arousal. But defense arousal is when we feel threatened. We're anxious. We are like have an urge to flee or an urge to fight. And our body's tense. Our breath is fast. We are not noticing. We don't want to talk to people necessarily. Our breath is fast and shallow. We're sweating and we are anxious, highly, highly anxious and on guard. And then there's overwhelmed, which is when you're numb, disinterested. It's like an animal who sort of plays dead when he's been caught by another animal and he plays dead. You are pain insensitive here, you're detached, you have an urge to give up. So what's important about this for us? Well, where would you guess people who are OC kind of live? People who are OC are highly threat sensitive. And so they react to cues in a much more hypervigilant way. They react to cues that other people don't see as threatening. They react as they're threatening. And social interactions often are threatening to them. And then they go into this threat system and then they can't see social signals. They don't recognize people they're trying to reach out to them. They are in this fight or flight mode, and so they can't connect. People who are overcontrolled also don't feel reward. They're not reward sensitive. They are threat sensitive, but they're not reward sensitive. So it takes a whole lot more for them to feel reward biologically. They tend to feel reward mainly from achievement and accomplishment. But the idea of going to a party for them, not rewarding at all. In fact, they probably dread it. In fact, it activates their threat system. So they're not feeling reward. So someone who's very people-oriented says, wow, I get to see my friends. But someone who has overcontrolled, maladaptive overcontrol coping says, oh no, I won't know what to say. What if I am rejected? What if I don't have a good time? I wish I didn't have to go. By the way, just for information, the overwhelmed state is where someone with anorexia typically lives. But if they start to get well, they don't move to reward, they move to threat. So when they start to eat and repair their bodies and start to move out of the overwhelmed system, they move into threat, and then they are so uncomfortable that they want to move back into the numbness. The same thing can be true for people who drink too much, use drugs, that can keep them in kind of a numb state so that there's kind of here. And if they come out of that, they go into the threat state. which is very scary. So that's the biology, and then the biology interacts with the environment, which is almost always the case. So biotemperament matters. And if we're going to address the issues of the overcontrolled person and the undercontrolled person, we need to know what is going on that we want to work with. So the undercontrolled person, who's impulsive, dramatic, emotionally expressive, mood dependent, they have high reward sensitivity. They have global focus processing and low inhibitory control that comes from their biology. So the high reward sensitivity we talked about, they also have high threat sensitivity. So you can kind of see how they go back and forth. Oh my gosh, this is wonderful. Oh, it's horrible, because they have both high threat sensitivity and high reward sensitivity. They have global focus processing, and global focus processing comes from seeing the big picture. They're not detail oriented, and they have low inhibitory control. So the low inhibitory control is the impulsivity that they're acting on what they feel, and they're acting on the cues very quickly that come up for them. The overcontrolled person has low reward sensitivity. They're emotionally constricted, shy, risk averse. They have high detail focus processing. I have a colleague who is overcontrolled more so than I am on this continuum of that. And I had a tiny little string hanging from my shoe. And we were in a meeting and she had to get up and cut that string off. I couldn't even see it. And she had to cut it off because it bothered her so much. They have high threat sensitivity but high inhibitory control. Now, typically, they can control the way they respond to things. And they really keep all of that packed inside so that you don't see what's going on the inside. So biotemperamental predispositions are powerful because they are impacting the way we see the world at a pre-conscious level. So if I go running and I see a twig, but I may jump because it's scary to me. I think it's a snake, but I jump before I even think the word snake. And that is my system reacting to threat. And it is reacting from a down-up level instead of coming from my brain saying, hey, that's a snake, that's a possible snake, it's a danger. I'm reacting more from the neuroreceptors that are in my body that are saying threat. And then I think snake. So this is the reason, why am I telling you this? This is the reason that people cannot talk themselves out of this threat and anxiety. So cognitive behavior therapy alone, for people who have overcontrolled coping, cognitive behavior therapy won't work. You can't talk yourself out of something that is coming from, that's firing from neuroreceptors in your body. So when this is extreme, when this overcontrol coping is extreme, the OC client's going to feel and appear uptight at work, at home, at the gym, at a party. They're constantly in threat. And they cannot easily modify their behavior to match the context that they're in. So you're starting to get an idea of how they cannot form relationships. So the other part that we want to talk about is social signaling. So when I showed you the faces earlier, when I did the flat face and when I did the constant smile, the overly prosocial, that's a social signal. And a social signal is any action, regardless of your intent, regardless of the form, but it occurs in another person and it communicates to that other person a message. And sometimes we're not even aware of what we're communicating, but we are. And for the over-controlled person, there is maladaptive social signaling. The signals they send out to other people that come from being in their threat system are not friendly, engaging. I want to cooperate with you. I want to be your friend. They're not sending those signals. And that interferes with their ability to form intimate relationships. Social signaling evolved to help us form bonds. And our cooperation with each other comes from social signaling. And when we see someone who has a flat face and isn't signaling, it sends us into threat. And we prefer not to affiliate with them. And that's true for you as therapist as well. When someone comes into your office and they have a flat face, you're going to feel threat. You may not be aware of it. You may just be aware of a sense of discomfort, but it's a biological reaction that you can't control. The open expression of emotion helps you feel safe. So not only do we need for the client to be aware of social signaling, we need for the therapist to be aware too, so that you can counteract your own reaction to people who come in and are not signaling in an open, connected way. So this is an example from the attachment work. People who are overcontrolled tend to have an avoidant detachment if you are into attachment theory. And this shows the power of our social signals on other people. So I'd like for you to watch the infant's reaction to the mother's social signaling, but I would also like for you to watch the social signaling of the infant. How does the infant try to signal to the mother?
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions. They turn away. They feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yeah.
So notice the mother didn't leave. She was right there. I guess she left in a different way, but she was not responding to the signals from the infant. And we have many examples of the power of social signaling and how it impacts relationships, and also the importance of this in forming friendships as adults. There's an adult tape on sort of the same thing about a couple in their marriage and how their social signaling was really blocking their ability to get along with each other. And this is one of the keys for RDBT, is to work on what the people are signaling and enable them to social signal more effectively. We're kind of socially anxious. So we are constantly scanning. That's one of the reasons people hate public speaking. We're constantly scanning faces to see, are we in the tribe or are we out of the tribe? How are people reacting? Are they accepting me? Are they not accepting me? And that is a part of social signaling in terms of reassuring other people where they are in terms of the relationship. which OC people are not doing. So social signaling matters. We become really anxious and aroused, and we don't want to hang around with people who are not social signaling in an open way. It strongly impacts our relationships. Okay, so just sort of look at the face. When the context calls for emotional expression, he sort of looks friendly, and emotion's not expressed. So Hollywood kind of knows about this. He's actually not frowning. He looks kind of aggressive to me. And that's because by default, a face that is blank, we determine to be threatening because that helps our survival. It's more important to know when there's a threat. So by default, a blank face is viewed as a threat. So if someone who has OC coping goes around with a blank face, it's actually going to push people away. The cost of this overcontrolled coping, this overcontrolled signaling, is a pervasive sense of social ostracism. So I think, I hope you're with me. So we've got the biology of overcontrolled coping. We've got the environment that we didn't talk about a lot, but we talked about a little bit. And that the main way that this shows up with other people is through social signaling. I also said you can't talk people out of it. So RDBT had to develop a way to help clients and therapists, by the way, to activate their social safety system and turn off that defensive arousal. It turns out that the mind and the body are connected, right? It's not news. So there are ways that you can turn off that defensive arousal and send a message to the brain that you are safe. It's not about the brain sending a message to the body. It's about the body sending a message to the brain. And that's how we can activate our social safety system. If you do have nervousness about public speaking, you probably know this for yourself. If you keep saying to yourself, there's no danger, there's no threat, what am I scared of? It doesn't work. You stay just as anxious as you were. To turn that off, to turn that threat off that's coming from your body, it's coming from that activating your sympathetic nervous system, you have to do it from the body. So we employ in our RDBT gestures, postures, facial expressions that help the clients get out of their threat system because they can't work in therapy if they're in their threat system. They can't hear you, they can't connect, they can't really process the information well. And we signal openness, we signal non-dominance to help them be able to work in therapy. But we also use our own signals to help ourselves stay out of threat because we're looking at a face that is flat and that is disingenuous. And that can activate our threat system so that we're not able to really be in the room in a relaxed and open way. So we're going to switch now and talk about another aspect of radically open DBT. So maybe this is a good time to take some questions. Do you have any questions that fit what we've already talked about, Maddie?
I don't have any that came in. I have one though.
Okay.
So what you just mentioned for an overcontrolled person who might be in their threat system, not able to do therapy, right? How is that? Could you explain the difference between that threat system for someone who's overcontrolled and when someone who is undercontrolled is emotionally dysregulated and unable to participate?
Yes. So the undercontrolled person comes in and they are dysregulated and they need, Maddie, actually, remember that the overcontrolled person and the UC person both have high threat sensitivity. So we want both of those people to get out of their threat system. Now the difference is that the undercontrolled person doesn't have the self-control to get out of their threat system. And so you're teaching them ways to do distress tolerance. This is what you can do. People who are overcontrolled have over distress tolerance. They keep running a race when they've broken a bone. And so we want them to chill. Now, if you tell an undercontrolled person, hey, let's chill out, they're going to go whoa, they're just going to shoot out of their chair at you because you don't understand. With an overcontrol person, they can control their emotions. So it's not about teaching distress tolerance. It's not about that. It's about how do you chill out? And so you're going to be a chilled out therapist. That's going to communicate to them chilling out. You're going to do things like big gestures. With an under control person, if you do big gestures, you're joining in with them, which sometimes can be okay. But with an over control person, when you do big gestures and you get them to do it, that helps activate their safety system. The under control person is already doing that. So it's a difference of identifying how to get them out of their threat system. One, to help one person chill out, and so because they already can regulate themselves, but they got to chill out and relax the tension and the threat that's in their body. And the other one, you really focus on the emotion. And how do I regulate this emotion? What do I do to bring my emotion down? Did that help?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so why is it called radically open DBT? What is radical openness? So radically open DBT, remember what I just said was that under control people have difficulty with emotions, and they will do just almost anything to turn off the emotions because they're so painful for them. They have a great deal of difficulty regulating them. Over control people just don't pay any attention to them. They inhibit them, they dismiss them, they minimize them. They often may discount them, that there's any value in emotions at all. And in RDBT, what we're doing, instead of having them learn how to regulate them, because they don't need that, we're asking them to turn into them. It's that lean in kind of thing. So if someone is having a difficult emotion, I don't want to help you tolerate it because you can already do that. I want to help you learn from it. And I want to help you ask yourself, what is there to learn from this yucky feeling I'm having? And so we ask them actually to focus on the difficult emotion. Doesn't sound like much fun, but it is bringing awareness, because they need to be more aware of the internal experience. They need to actively seek what they can learn from the discomfort that they're having, rather than just pushing it aside. So one of the things we do is we have them do what's called purposeful self-inquiry. And we also work with them, remember the feedback issues. So we work with them on cultivating a willingness to be wrong. OC people kind of pride themselves on being right. And you know what? A lot of times they are, because they're perfectionistic, they're detail-oriented, so they're often right. But maybe they could be more open to being wrong sometimes. Nobody really likes to know it all. And so there comes an opportunity to change if needed. So sometimes it comes down to in interpersonal relationships. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be liked? Do you want to be right, or do you want to fit in? Because being right is not always so important. If you're telling a story and somebody keeps correcting minor details in your story, that's annoying. And you don't want to be around that person. So what we want, but if you try to tell someone who's OC, hey, this is what needs to change, remember they can't hear feedback. They tend to shut it down, can't hear it's wrong. They tend to shut down feedback and not listen to it because they're very used to being right and they have rigid ways of thinking. So the way we get around that is by having them do self-inquiry for themselves. When you're feeling this way, what is there to learn? When you notice this and it makes you have this bit of tension, what is there to learn? And because they can regulate so well, they have the ability to go into emotions, explore it, and learn from it.
All right, you asked for questions, they're rolling in. Can I shoot one off to you?
Yeah.
Okay, so this one says, would a therapist want to be calm and relaxed with someone who might be over-controlled to help them get out of threat, or more expressive in order to help them let go?
So it's interesting. It's not either or. So we call it the laid back surfer therapist. So I'm trying to model a little bit here. I'm drinking every now and then. And by the way, drinking is a way to get out of your threat, because you can't rest and digest when you're in your threat system. So drinking something It's a way of helping people get out of their threat system. So you want to be chilled, but you can be chilled and be expressive. In fact, when you are in your threat system, you may remember that the voice gets monotonic. But when you're chilled and relaxed, you have a melodic voice. It's musical. It goes up and down. And so you can be more expressive, but not too expressive. So you want to be, it's sort of the just right kind of thing. And you have to watch your client, because if you get too expressive, they're going to start shutting down if it's threatening to them. So you want to be expressive so that it helps activate the social safety system. But if you're overly enthusiastic, they're not comfortable with that. So it's expressive, but not overly so. So it's both. Is there another question?
I think that might have addressed it. I have another question that says, what are the connections between the systems of oppression and an overcontrolled versus undercontrolled schema?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I'll see if they rephrase it, and we'll get back to it.
Okay, should I go on? Okay, so in RDBT, we assume that therapists and patients bring perceptual and regulatory biases into the treatment environment. And this means that we have to assume we can be wrong too. And that the person who is the most expert on themselves is the client. And it would be arrogant of us to assume we know more than the client. And so we come in with that attitude of learning from the client, asking the client, and that it's a lot of ask, don't tell in the therapy session. Regulatory biases means that we see the world as we are, not as the world is. So we have, I grew up in the country on a dirt road. And when people came to my house, it was a huge deal. It was a big deal. We cleaned the house. We bought tons of food. They would often stay for a long period of time. We would have 3 meals a day in the fancy, quote fancy, dining room. And that's the way we had people over. It was a long time as an adult before I realized it didn't have to be that way. And that every time somebody came over, I was like cooking a lot of food, enough for like 10 when there was only 3. And I was cleaning the house, and I was cleaning, and it was a chore, let me tell you. And I, of course, didn't want to do it that often. And it took a long time for me to realize I was seeing that I had to do it this way because of a bias that I had. It was a way I had grown up that seemed normal. It's the idea that a fish doesn't know water. So David Foster Wallace tells a story of 2 young fish swimming, and they go by this older fish who's headed the other way, and the older fish nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" The 2 fish swim on a while, and after a time, one fish looks at the other and says, "What the heck is water?" You don't know what you don't know. Like what you grow up with, the world that you live in is your normal sometimes. So you don't know how you may be seeing things differently than someone else. And this is a part of RDBT, to learn and to be open to our own self-inquiry as therapists about what we don't know. So radical openness is this willingness to learn and assuming that we don't know what the truth is, because we're ever learning what the truth is. And it's not radical acceptance. Radical acceptance is letting go of fighting reality. It's about turning suffering that cannot be tolerated into pain that can be. And radical openness is challenging our perceptions of reality, that maybe we have something to learn more about what's happening than what we already know. And maybe we aren't seeing things so clearly. So how do you practice radical openness? And this takes us back kind of to that psychological health part that we talked about. You want to acknowledge that feedback's occurring. And you want to acknowledge that you don't like the feedback. And then you turn toward that discomfort and say, what is it I might need to learn here? You don't distract, deny. You don't try to regulate yourself and say it's okay, or come up with reasons why this could be happening. Say, what is it I might need to learn? And then based on that learning, then you can flexibly respond by doing what's needed. And this is a practice that the therapists do as well as the clients do. And it's very brief. You just spend 5 minutes a day sort of noticing tension in your body. If you have an interaction with someone and you have this reaction that you don't quite understand, you say, what does I need to learn from that? What does I need to learn from someone not inviting me to their home? What is it I need to learn about someone telling me I should change the schedule? What is it I need to learn? And then to take that learning and to be able to respond differently. So an example might be helpful. I worked with a trainer who is a really good friend of mine. I've been working with her for over 10 years. And one day she doesn't like plastic bottles, and I respect that a great deal. But I was having trouble figuring out how I was going to take water to work out with her and to the gym if I didn't take it in a plastic bottle, because I'm a klutz and I would drop a glass one. So I figured it out. I got this sleeve that fit on the glass bottle, and so I took my water bottle to the gym, and she said, "Oh, I see you got a water bottle." And I said, "Yeah, but you know what? I just realized I poured the water out of a plastic bottle into this glass bottle to bring it to the gym." And I laughed. And she said, "Oh, so you're lying to me." And she was teasing. But I had this tension in my body, annoyance, resistance, and it didn't fit the situation at all. So what was there to learn from that? So I did self-inquiry. And part of it was there was a long way around, but where I kind of ended up was this idea of having to perform. And my mother was very OC, and if things were not, things needed to be very perfect. And so when what I got into was this idea of pretending to be someone that I wasn't. And I wasn't doing that. But I learned from this situation how important that was for me, that for someone to say to me that I was pretending to be someone I wasn't created a real sense of upset in me. And I learned that, wait a minute, I learned from that I don't really need to worry about other people's perceptions of me in that way. I just need to be me. So that's sort of an example of how you learn from self-inquiry.
Wonderful. Karen, we've got about 15 minutes left. So we don't have any questions rolling in. So I say we just keep going until the time.
Okay. So RO is an experiential therapy. When I talk about it today, it's going to be really difficult for you to understand the impact of it. It's similar to mindfulness because you learn more about it by the way that you experience. It's something you experience, especially self-inquiry. It's something that you experience. And it's not easy to do radical openness. It requires a willingness to be wrong with an intention to change. And you can no longer assume that your perspective is the right one. When you feel really upset that someone is so wrong, one of the things you have to do is ask yourself, what can I learn from this? And it means taking responsibility. And this is one of the key points of RDBT, is that each individual is responsible for their own choices and responses to the world. You can't blame others or fall apart or expect the world to change. It's about me and what is it I need to change. So let's take a look at the treatment real quickly here. So the goals in radically open dialectical behavior therapy are to decrease behavioral overcontrol, decrease the aloof and distant relationships, decrease emotional loneliness, increase behavioral flexibility, increase openness, and increase expression of emotion to lead to social connections. The mechanism of change, what really brings about change for someone who's overcontrolled, is the ability to connect with other people. It's so rewarding to see people who have not been in a relationship for 30, 40 years and suddenly they're dating. To suddenly have a friend and they feel accepted into a tribe, and the difference that that makes. And the treatment, if you do adherent RDBT, it includes an outpatient individual session which happens 1 hour a week, a skills class where they learn different skills for OC people, such as self-inquiry, which we talked about, and that's 2.5 hours per week. Telephone consultation, but they rarely call because they are very good at regulating and they don't. One person said, well, I don't do crises. Okay, so they're not going to call. If you don't like having calls, work with people who are OC. And it's helpful to have a consultation meeting, but it's not required. DBT kind of requires it, but Tom said he understood that it was very difficult for therapists to take the time to be part of a consultation meeting. So he recommends it, but it's not required. The hierarchy of treatment. Of course, the very first thing is life-threatening behaviors. And by the way, people who are OC do self-harm and they can be suicidal. Many times if someone is doing self-harm, maybe not so much anymore, but they used to automatically assume that was borderline personality disorder, but it's not. And in fact, people who are OC are very lethal because when they make a suicide attempt, they've planned it out and they know exactly what they're going to do. They have made it very unlikely that anyone's going to find them, and they won't tell you. So if you're seeing someone who's OC, this life-threatening behavior being here at the top is really important. You've got to ask. Now, they're also, most of the time, won't lie to you. People who are OC have a code of going by the rules, and so they won't lie to you. But you've got to ask. They're probably not going to volunteer. So even if they haven't mentioned anything at all about life-threatening behavior, it's a question to ask if you have an OC client coming in. The second area of working with people who are OC is in what we call alliance ruptures. So the first priority in treatment is to check on self-harm and suicide. The second one is to be very alert for what's called alliance ruptures. Now, alliance ruptures are when the client doesn't feel understood by you or that the treatment isn't working. They start to become disengaged. They're not really offering you details. They're not speaking up and describing events for you. You can notice that they're withdrawing in the session. Alliance ruptures for an OC client will happen. There will come a time when they do not think you are understanding them and they don't think the treatment is relevant to them. The important part of this is relationship repair, because when OC people, when they experience conflict in a relationship, or when they believe that the relationship isn't working, they leave the relationship. They may leave and blame you in their heads, or they may give you a perfectly reasonable explanation for the reason they're leaving that makes you not question them, but it's really not the reason they're leaving. So the repair of the relationship is actually part of the therapy. So we expect alliance ruptures. And it gives us an opportunity to work on this ability to repair a relationship instead of just letting the person leave. And then the third part, first is life-threatening behavior. Second is this alliance rupture and learning how to repair relationships and hang in there when there's conflict in a relationship instead of just leaving. And then the third one are themes, behavioral themes that fit for OC people. So one of the difficulties of working with someone who's overcontrolled is they don't give you a lot of information. Remember, they're inhibited. So the themes are ideas that you explore with them that help you find out some of the issues that they're having. And one of them is inhibited emotional expressions. We talked about that. And so you're going to look for inhibited emotional expressions. You're going to ask the client, what does inhibited emotional expression mean to you? How does that apply to you? Remember that ask, don't tell concept. They also have a lot of behaviors that fit in a category called overly cautious and hypervigilant. They're very risk averse. And when they are hypervigilant, that is that threat system. So you look on that theme for behaviors that you're going to work in therapy too. Rigid and rule-governed behavior. And all of these are behaviors that get in the way of their having relationships, which is the aloof and distant relationships. What does aloof and distant relationships mean to you? How does that apply to you? And you get information surprisingly sometimes in detail about how these themes apply to them. And the final one is envy and bitterness. And individuals who are OC have inside a lot of secret thoughts, secret fantasies about revenge, because they don't express their emotions openly, and they can build up, and they're very dutiful, and they will do more than their fair share of things, but they have sort of an envy and bitterness, and it can come from social comparison too, that they compare themselves to other people, and when they fall short, they can have envy and bitterness, and they want to get back at that person. So one of the things when you work with OC people is you want to let them know that you're willing to talk about anything, and that there are some things that people are ashamed of sometimes that they've done, and that you're very willing to talk about that at any time. And you're going to look at social comparisons. You're going to look for ways that they may have tried to get revenge on people. One of the examples they give sometimes is a guy who had these prize-winning orchids, and his neighbor was also a gardener and got very envious of his winning all these awards. So he put poison at night on the guy's flowers so that he couldn't win. And it was secret. It wasn't in the limelight, but it was a revenge behavior. Okay, so it looks like we're at 5 minutes. So I think maybe that's a good place to stop. So any questions or comments? I would love to hear from people.
Do you have one question for you? So as I ask this, if anybody else has some, shoot them into the text, to the chat, please. So to clarify the question that I asked earlier, it says, what is the relationship between experiences of oppression, so like systematic trauma, and temperament development, so OC versus UC?
Oh, okay. Let me see if this answers it. What we know is that we used to think personality didn't change, but now we know that personality is more flexible than we thought it was. Thank goodness, so we can treat it and work with it. So there is some research that experiences with trauma do impact the personality style. And in a very oppressive environment, a person can learn how to cope through being over-controlled, because they have to be. And that it would have to be severe enough, and it has to be over time enough to truly change the personality style, but it can. People who've been through very severe child abuse, people who've been through war, people who have been through ongoing abusive situations, they have shown that that changes their personality style. Now, it's also true that an under-controlled person who's in an oppressive situation can temporarily behave in an OC way, but it's temporary. And then they go back to they do it because the environment demands it, their survival demands it, and then but it can't last. So it reverts back. Did that answer the question?
It did for me, so I hope so. I hope it does.
I did too. I did my best.
You did great. I have another question. It says, couldn't bulimia also be considered a disorder of overcontrol? Many models of pathology believe this.
Yes, bulimia is for many of the behaviors that people have, you have to dig deep to figure out whether it's an overcontrol behavior or an under control behavior. So bulimia, if it's planned, if it's thought about ahead of time, if it's done in a very purposeful way, it's probably overcontrolled. In fact, that's what we found for some bulimic patients. If it is more random, spur of the moment, more impulsive, it's more likely to be part of under control. So bulimia can go either way, is what we found, depending on how the symptom is exhibited. If someone's impulsive, just the other day, someone said, I impulsively booked a trip to China. I've never been so impulsive. But it turns out that the only thing that was impulsive was they saw a good deal. They had been thinking ahead that they wanted to go on this same trip. They had saved the money. They had asked for time off work. So it wasn't really impulsive. So part of it is to dig beneath and see what's underneath the symptom to make sure whether it's overcontrolled or under control.
Awesome, thank you. For someone who might believe that their depression is more of the issue that they're wanting to work on versus having some over-controlled tendencies, how would you suggest working with a client like that?
So if the depression is recent, it's not chronic, it is, you have an identifiable source for the depression, I'd work with the depression. It's the chronic depression that's not responding to treatment that is more, we need to work on underlying causes. So I think it's the same. So what I would say is we are going to work on your depression, and this is the way we're going to work on it. And there are scripts that we have in the RDBT book that helps you, how you help a client identify as OC. There are measures that you can use to help a client identify as OC. And once they identify as OC, there are scripts that help the client make the connection between OC, social connection, and their depression. So I can absolutely understand why someone says, I don't want to be depressed. What are you talking about? So we have to help them make that connection about why working on this is going to help them be undepressed. And there are, in the textbook, if you want to look at the RDBT textbook, it talks about how to do that.
Awesome, thank you. They're rolling in. So what is a useful way to work through a disagreement between two over-controlled people if you're working with one of these individuals therapeutically?
So the client is OC and the therapist is OC?
I think maybe it's asking, you have like a couple or a relationship that both people are over-controlled, but you're only working with one of the people.
Okay, so that's actually fits the model pretty well, because OC says we are responsible for our behavior. We're responsible for the way we respond to other people. So one of the things that I would do first is, in fact, I have someone right now, when couples start to have trouble, imagine what happens to the OC person's threat system. So the other person in the relationship, let's say you're working with a Y, the husband can become a threat cue. So she sees the cue and she goes into threat. When she's into threat, she can't connect. She is going to have maybe a flat face. There's not going to be a welcoming smile. There's not going to be inly friendly. And she's going to be hyper vigilant for any additional threat from the husband. So one of the things you want to do is just to start with is to lower the threat system. And then actually one of the skills that you probably already know, the validation skills, that still remains a helpful interpersonal skill. So can the person validate the other person's point of view? Relax, get out of your threat system, signal cooperative behavior, see the issue is out here, here's our relationship, here's the issue out here, validate the other person's point of view, but you don't have to agree, you're just validating their point of view, that you understand their point of view, and then work on being able to express yourself in a way that's not threatening to the other person, but that can also communicate your point of view. So I think the key is to really help them get out of their threat system, because they can't do any of that if they're in their threat system.
That's great, awesome. Okay, we'll ask one more question and then we will wrap up. So what are some strategies to help under-controlled clients increase their controlled skills?
So helping under control, DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, not RDBT, but dialectical behavior therapy is the therapy for people who are under controlled and need to increase control of their emotions. Mindfulness of the emotion in the moment, because remember the UC person is kind of reacting almost like in a phobia about emotions. They can't tolerate the emotion. And so if you could just have them sit with the emotion and just let it, and know that it's like a bell curve and it's going to pass, that can help. Distraction skills, doing math in their head when they are trying to give themselves some time to calm down so they don't respond too impulsively. Urge surfing is one that works to help them not react on urges too quickly. And the whole distress tolerance skills package from DBT, such as self-soothing, being able to use pictures of loved ones, asking if they're fearful of abandonment, having someone that loves them in their head and saying, hey, do you love me? Just sort of having that comfort come about. So a lot of the DBT skills is what I would say for the under control person.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Karen, for coming and being a wonderful presenter that you always are. We are always glad and joyed to have you with us. Thank you to all of you that are here live right now or who will be watching this recording later. We appreciate you tuning in and being engaged. Like I said, CEUs, an email will follow with a survey. If you've gone ahead and signed up for the CEU, fill out that survey and another email will follow with the actual survey. We will also follow up sometime later this week, the beginning of next week, with the slides from the PowerPoint today. If you have any questions for us, feel free to reach out. Otherwise, thank you all for joining and participating. And Karen, thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Thanks. I had a great time. Thanks to everyone for coming. I know everyone's got Zoom fatigue, so thanks for coming.
Yes, yes. All right. Bye, y'all.